All right, you guys, welcome back to the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. Excited for our interview today with Andrew Lauver with Farm Journal. Man, super glad to have you on here. Thanks for making the time to sit down and chat.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity, and it means a lot to be able to share some perspectives here.
Yeah, man, I've seen you for a long time now on like LinkedIn and the social medias and stuff like that keep popping up. I'm like, this guy's out there. He's moving and grooving. He's working in government relations. He's working a lot of different areas and making an impact as a young guy in the industry. So when Zach brought you on, I was like, perfect. I'm excited because I've been following online for a long time.
Yeah, I think growing up in agriculture and then spending an entire career here in agriculture, the opportunity to advocate and to carry forward with a social purpose drive and be intentional with that has really been an area of passion for me.
Yeah, awesome. I love it, man. Well, so let's kick it off. What does it mean for you to be intentional?
It's a great question. And as I reflect on that, I think about self-awareness. So first of all, being aware of your strengths and also those areas that you need to improve, and then doing the best you can to determine what the goals are that you have for yourself and your organization, capitalizing on your strengths, and then managing through the time that you have to reach those goals. I think for me, as an example, I would just point to some of the professional journey that I've had, along with the academic journey I've had. Specifically, I knew early in my career I wanted to move around and have some experiences outside of my comfort zone, which for me is Iowa and agriculture in the Midwest. And so, having intentionally spent time working with some crop types that were totally out of my comfort zone, cotton and canola being two, seeking those opportunities and then developing within that and applying it now today back in some of the crops I'm most comfortable with has been an important element.
Yeah, that's cool. And so you guys farm as well, right? You're involved in the family operation.
Yeah, that's correct. We do. We have a fifth generation family farm. My wife and I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old daughter as well. So we have a couple farm hers here within the family, and if they so choose, someday they'd be the sixth to carry on the family farm, and it's certainly a good life and a great place to raise children too.
Yeah, love the intention of that, man. That's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about, over the course of your career, you've been with a few different organizations, you've worked in a few different places, you've been in some interesting situations, I'm sure, right? A lot of people seems like right now are struggling to retain good talent. So, I'm interested from as you look at yourself and others from your generation, what is important today to young leaders as it pertains to retaining and sticking and staying with an organization?
I think it's incredibly important to have um, level of responsibility. So significant some significance to the role that you have that contributes to the mission of the organization and where the organization is headed. I think that this era we're in, and the generation that's coming into the workplace or maybe is in the workplace for a decade is really looking to contribute. They're looking to make their mark, and there has to be an understanding and a realization that individuals need experience to make significant decisions, but never underestimate the contributions that a individual just coming into the workplace can make through their new ideas, through their thoughts that could be derived from some new technology that could be incorporated.
Yeah.
I think about how some of the farms that are in the area where we farm and those that I've worked with over time have been intentional about bringing young talent in and empowering them. And a lot of that has been through precision technology and incorporating that into the farm, which has then led them to develop more responsibility and helped succession planning in many cases. I think you talk about being intentional, succession planning in farms can be very difficult, but the more intentional you are about it, especially from a leadership standpoint, from a primary decision maker perspective, it certainly eases it. And so I think responsibility and having some empowerment behind the opportunities and a purpose, a social purpose, if you can marry a social purpose to the work, I think that's incredibly important. And then I would say quite simply checking in. So checking in from the standpoint of how are you doing? That's just a simple question that could be asked. And then where would you like to go? Do you have goals that are beyond the role you're in today? How can we get you there? You can't ask that question too often, I don't think. Now, an individual needs to be in a role for a while to get the experience to advance, but to be able to ask that question and have some open dialogue, I think is incredibly important, because I've seen scenarios in which individuals have moved on where I don't know that they necessarily had voiced that or felt like they had an opportunity to voice that.
Yeah. How often do you think, if you were just to ballpark it, how often is checking in need to happen? I'm always interested in that.
It's a great question. I have been fortunate to have a number of outstanding individuals that I've reported to over the years and have been on teams over the years. And I have found that asking that question at least quarterly is an important one. How's it going? Because again, a lot of work can be project based, and these can be projects that can last 6 months to a year to 3 years. And so asking that question at least quarterly is important. And at least it opens up the opportunity for dialogue that cascades beyond just the professional environment. Maybe the individual wants to share some exciting personal news, or perhaps something that's been a little bit more challenging too. And so I think, that question is just one that should be asked quarterly. I have appreciated leaders that I've reported to through time that have provided one-on-ones weekly, which just really allow for a consistent cadence. There's at least one opportunity or challenge that seems to arise weekly that then you can discuss with a manager in a weekly one-to-one. And especially in the remote and virtual environment, or even hybrid environment that we're in now, there's just not as much water cooler talk or inability. The open door policy is still the open door policy, but to me, it's more so become, when I call, I know that you're going to pick up the phone and we'll be able to talk about it.
Yeah. When now the open door has become, you can pop into my Zoom meeting, right?
Yeah, that's right. Huddle. Yeah, or a huddle. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how I would receive it if one of my team members just popped into the Zoom while I was making a podcast with someone. So
Mm-hmm. I
there
know.
has to be, obviously there's boundaries, but you mentioned a really interesting word. I want to come back to this, right? The word was cadence. I talked about this with Courtney Van Scoy when I interviewed her from
Mm-hmm.
Bear. And we talked about cadence. What's the cadence of your coaching? So from a leadership standpoint, I'm always recommending to our coaching clients to develop a cadence for your coaching. So how often, what is your very intentional cadence? How often are you sitting down? Is it weekly? Is it quarterly? Is it every 6 months? Do you wait until you're forced to do a performance review? Right. I think that's really important. So I was glad that you brought that up, because more people, I believe, need to hear that word and really take it to heart and say, okay, what is my intentional cadence for how often I sit down on either, whether it's on the phone, in person, over lunch, wherever, with my people? I think it's an important consideration.
I completely agree with that. It's just like anything, practice makes perfect. And when you're working in an environment where you do have that cadence, it's followed up with consistency, whether you realize it or not. You're continually thinking about that forward looking connection. Okay, that's going to happen again, and I'm going to be prepared for it. Or I'm stuck right now. There's something that's really challenging me. I've got an opportunity. one of the elements that I think creates the greatest anxiety within professional life and personal life is uncertainty. It's just
Mm,
simply not knowing, right? And when you know that you're going to be able to connect with someone who has authority to make a change or support you, it's just very helpful. And I think it's even more important now in the remote environment that we're in, that there's that opportunity there.
yeah, I think now that we're so remote, the intentionality of managers, of leaders has to be probably even more, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise it's very easy for most of us to start feeling like I'm out here in my home office on an island alone, and when it's not going well, nobody could possibly be screwing this up worse than I am, right?
Yeah. There's no looking over your shoulder or looking around the cubicle, to somebody else to kind of make a comparison or ask for some help. It can be relatively isolating.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it's important to be in conversation. Any particular tech tools, communication tools that you've been exposed to over time that have worked really well for you? I'm just curious.
Yeah, actually, I have really appreciated utilizing Slack
Hmm.
recently. So Slack really has cut down on the number of emails and keeps communication within chains for entire teams to work within. So I've appreciated that platform. And then Monday.com too. Monday has been effective at some communication project management from that standpoint. But I will say the phone call should never be lost,
Right.
because I still think there is so much value in a phone call, and I've seen it time and time again, uh where some element of communication or important element is sent through text message, and it
Hmm.
just does not carry the weight that it needs to.
Yeah.
And early in my career, there was a gentleman who was experienced in his career, and he told me, if there's ever a sensitive topic or a situation that you're in, every time pick the phone up and call them about it. Because and that was really kind of at the outset of when we really all started texting a lot.
Hmm.
But it was at an important point in my career where I felt like he imparted that wisdom on me, and it got me off to a good start in terms of those sensitive
Yeah.
subjects.
I am a big proponent of that, man. If it's getting weird, if it's getting tense, it feels tense on your side, at least from the text message or the
Mm-hmm.
email, just pick up the phone. I
Yeah.
feel like we live in this world now where people feel like they have to schedule a time to give a call in so many cases. And I get that. We want to be respectful of each other's time, or you want to manage your time well. And so, I'm not always trying to give you a call just whenever, but man, if it's within the team, like there's a core group of people around me that
Mm-hmm.
supports the business, key accounts, etc. And they know, like, listen, you don't need an appointment. Just call me. If I miss you, right, you're
Yeah.
important. I will call you back, right? Like
Yep.
it shows me on my iPhone when I missed a call, right? And if I'm wanting to talk to Andrew and Andrew calls me, I'm going to call him back. So,
Exactly. That's
mhm.
right. Absolutely.
So much that can get in the way. So many silly little stories that get in the way because of how we perceive the all capital text message,
Hmm. I
right?
know. It's so
So,
true. And I think we've become in some ways so scheduled,
mhm.
in our days. And so the ability to have a call, that's not necessarily virtual, but rather just audio, I think frees up your mind a little bit sometimes to be a little bit more intentional and creative, maybe in some of the things you're thinking about, if you
Yeah.
if you zoned out virtually.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. So we talked about the cadence of coaching. We talked about a fair number of things around getting young people plugged in. I mean, really just
Hmm.
being there, giving them and a little bit of a career trajectory as well. Like, hey, where do you see yourself going? Where would you like to get going? Where would you like to end up? Great. How can I coach you at this level of the game to get you there? Talking about technology, how do we communicate? Let's talk about culture. for a little bit,
Hmm.
because I know this is a big buzzword. A lot of people talk about it. I'm of the opinion, I don't think people do an intentional enough job of building it within organizations. I think people are often doing this unintentionally, perhaps just flying by the seat of the pants, or they talked about it once at a strategic planning meeting. They said, this is the culture. They made it a poster, didn't really do anything about it. So what do you believe for for you, the organizations that you've been around? What's been important around building intentional culture?
Oh, it's been really important for me, and I've asked questions in previous scenarios when coming into an organization too, or considering coming into an organization about the culture. It's a really important aspect to me, and I would anchor back to the family farm. I mean, the family farm is a 24/7, something could occur where you need to be there, and it's a reliance on other people to ultimately get the job done, get the crop planted, and get it harvested. And so when it comes to the professional work culture, there needs to be a level of trust amongst colleagues. There needs to be a level of understanding of each other's strengths, and also just that you know that you can count on each other to get the job done, especially when things get tough. Most of the time, hopefully things are going quite well, but I think culture is even more important when the seas get a little bit rocky. And so a few of the things that I've seen work especially well through time and have appreciated are retreats. So taking time to get to know each other both socially and professionally as entire teams, in an environment that could be at a headquarters, or it could be off site somewhere. I do think, and it could be something that most people have experienced by now, and some have not, but really getting an understanding of personalities. So if it's a personality assessment, and truly understanding where are you in terms of the way that you perceive information, the way you like to communicate. If someone is adverse to a certain type of communication, or we just talked about the importance of phone calls, if someone really doesn't like to be texted information, and in fact instead prefers phone calls or virtual calls or in-person handshakes, we need to know that, to be able to be firing on all cylinders. And so the other element too that I think is important is um understanding the mission. What is our progress to date? What have we achieved? But where are we going? Because if we've had some nice accomplishments recently, but we don't know where we're headed, I also think it's very challenging for people to buy in to the future, because they don't really know what they're buying into. And so to have that mission, and to bring it up often, to talk about it often, it needs to be something that's brought up, and not just brought up once in a town hall or a big call, and here's where we're headed now, and then nobody really brings it up again. It's not as effective as really that cadence of, here's where we're headed, how are we doing, here's where we're headed, how are we doing, and allowing for some empowerment through questions, etc. I think are a few elements that have built a stronger culture.
Well, and with your last point, it really brings up an interesting, uh, I guess I'll call this kind of an interesting angle, because often we think, well, if I say it once, right, or say it twice, like they should get it. Right? They
Hmm.
should know it. Like, and I think that becomes the assumption of busy leaders, maybe not necessarily intentional leaders, that we think that they got it. Hey, we said it once, where I said, hey, this is how we're going to be. This is going to be the culture around here, and we think that people got it, but we didn't really continue to um, preach that and teach that. And somebody said on a podcast interview here a while back that culture is caught, not taught.
Hmm.
And so I think you have to repeat it, right? You have to be on repeat again and again, talking about this culture and saying what it is. And then, and in our world, we look at the development process, whether it's personal, professional development, doesn't matter. It always goes from awareness to embodiment.
Hmm.
Today we make them aware through training, but that doesn't mean that's who they are now. Embodiment means that's now who they are. You don't even think about it. I was at an event the last couple of days, a bunch of guys there from the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And one guy was just talking about how uh, somebody, it was kind of maybe a muddy time, and they had been pulling in and out of the driveway, and obviously, or in and out of the field road, and obviously, some mud gets on the paved road, right?
Right.
See that all the time, especially when it gets wet out. And so a neighbor comes along, just happens to be going down the road with his payloader,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he slows down, sees what's there, drops his payloader down, scrapes it off, and takes care of it, and gives the guy a call and just says, "Hey, I took care of this for you. Don't worry about it for later." And my friend who was at the event, he said, "That's what I love about the Midwest."
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Such a
And it's
shining example.
right like that, because that's what happens. And there's no question, right? That is the
Mm-hmm.
culture of Midwest agriculture.
Right.
It's just how we do out there. Maybe you don't get that in other parts of the country. Maybe you don't get that in other countries. I don't know. But I do know, like, if I was in Western Iowa, I would expect that to be a part of the culture. People just pitching in to help people without being asked, people not getting mad about it. Like, I know that certainly doesn't happen in my HOA out here. If there's a little dog doo-doo, somebody's going to take a picture of it
Yeah.
and make a Facebook post, right? I'm like, how about you just go get a garbage bag and pick it up? Because that's what I do, but I'm from the Midwest.
That's right. And I think a lot of that, I think about that often, especially in the Midwest. From early childhood, you hear about the big dinners that were held, in the farmhouse, and during the threshing time, for example, there were
Yeah.
groups of 12 that would come in and have lunch and then go back out to the field. And those weren't family members, they were all neighbors, right? It's a bunch of neighbors
Right.
helping each other. And you see today, during times of crisis, still, someone will have an unfortunate medical event or pass away, and you'll have 12 combines and 120-acre field, for example. So it's definitely a significant aspect that's, I think, ingrained into agriculture and agribusiness.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that becomes the example of embodiment, right? That's what it is. And
Mhm.
so we go from awareness to embodiment. So, I want to come back and just nail down the last point that you were making about culture. It's like, it has to be spoken and it has to be reminded,
Mhm.
and we have to sort of preserve those traditions or new behaviors, if that's what the case may be, and recognize those, reward those, see those, make sure that it gets talked about, in it within the culture, because that's how it becomes real. It just becomes part of the legend, right, of what this
Yes.
place is about. So cool. All right, man. Talk to me a little bit about your past over the course of your career. What's been a big hurdle that you've had to overcome personally during your career?
I appreciate this question because I think there have been a number of times where there have been some challenges. So I would cite a couple of them. So early in my career, I had an opportunity to work internationally, and was very fortunate for that opportunity early in my career. But there were 90 different countries that I could go to where corn was grown. And I got the assignment, and it was in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And I actually had to look up Saskatoon, Saskatchewan to understand, where I was headed. And I knew going into it that I would be helping to provide insights to farmers on growing corn and soybeans in Canada. And so I was really looking forward to that because I knew about corn and soybeans and their production, but the crop acres that were there presently were both wheat, canola, pulse crops. Well, I didn't really know anything about wheat, canola, and pulse crops. And similarly, just a bridge to time that I had in industry relations working in cotton. I had not worked with cotton either. And so I recall when I knew I had the cotton assignment, for example, I bought a textbook because I thought, I'm going to study up on cotton and I'm going to understand the technical aspects in case a farmer asks me on my, first foray into a circumstance where a farmer's going to ask me something. And I went to that first cotton meeting and no one asked me any questions. I instead approached it with listening, ears, trying to understand. And so I take these two examples and blend them into one. A farmer is a farmer is a farmer. No one farmer is the same, but they all have similar goals and they all care about where they're headed, and they likely have somebody helping them from a family perspective or a neighbor perspective, and they want to talk about that. And so asking them questions, those needs, I think that to me has been some of the most challenging professional circumstances, has been being put into assignments where I knew nothing necessarily about the product, but I thankfully knew the audience. And so I leveraged more so the audience to learn about the product and to understand the product further based on their needs. And I think that's so important in the first 90 days in a role or the first 6 months in a role, is to not rush out there and try to tell someone everything you know about the product that you're trying to sell them, but rather rush out there and try to understand what they need and then determine how the product can help solve that for them.
Yeah. What a beautiful concept, right? Of just listening first.
Yeah. It's hard to do. It's really hard to do, but the more you can do it, the more it'll reward you.
This is a personal opinion, and I'm not going to say this is best practice or the only way to do it, because obviously if you're a company that sells a product, you have to do product training to help your people become knowledgeable about what's being sold, right? And I almost think one of the first things we should be teaching people is just how to be great at asking questions, how to be great at being curious, because that is what really opens people up, even if you don't know anything. Right. It's not. And what I see a lot of young, especially young salespeople doing is getting themselves backed into a corner or getting shut down unnecessarily because they went out there and tried to prove their product knowledge or corn and soybean knowledge or their canola knowledge, but they only really know corn and soybeans.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
No, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think from a professional perspective, that has definitely been, as I look back, on the years here to date, that has been one of the most important elements. The other thing that I'd be remiss not to mention is about 3 years into my career, I dealt with a very tragic personal loss, very, very tragic personal loss. And I think about individuals in their careers, how that can really rock your world and your perspective. And especially when we're in outward facing industry relations, sales, leadership roles, it can be really hard to put on the face and be happy and really go to work. But I really derived a lot of inspiration at that point from again, knowing your strengths, but two, understanding those who came before you, right? So I thought a lot often about Teddy Roosevelt. He lost his mother and his wife within 3 hours in the same house. And that to me, just understanding that and really grasping, and understanding the leaders that came before you and how they got over their biggest hurdles, was important to me too. So I think, just to answer your question from a personal but also a professional standpoint, I would share those outlooks.
There's, one of the things I love about doing this podcast is I learned things I didn't know. And I even wrote a paper on Teddy Roosevelt. I remember when I was in high school, but I don't remember catching that fact. He lost his mother and his wife.
His mother and his wife in the same house, about 3 hours apart, for separate medical issues. Yep.
Wow. That's
wild. Yeah. And that was then when he went to North Dakota. So he decided, he was a New York legislator at the time, young, like still in his 20s, I believe. And then he decided, I'm going to go out to North Dakota. And then that's when he went out to North Dakota, which really then inspired the whole entire national park system, because he was inspired by the
Yeah.
West and all the beauty that it had to offer, etc. But
Right.
um, yeah, really appreciated sort of obviously a tragic circumstance there, but like realizing those that came before you and accomplished great things. There's so much that we have to learn from them, you know.
Absolutely. Well, and it's a great way to frame up the question, which is, what's been a big hurdle, in your career. And so we deal with these things. We are very much humans, right? In our role,
Mm-hmm.
we're not cogs in a machine, just, doing a job, right? I mean,
Yeah,
the thing I would love that I think intentional leaders are sensitive to is that your people have things going on inside and outside of work, and we have a professional
yep,
obligation to show up and do the job well, at least to the best of our ability. And right, you maybe someone had a sick child last night and they were up, or they've
that's
got,
right.
that's currently going through something, or whatever. I have a daughter with type 1 diabetes, and that was especially early on in my career. This is now,
Mm-hmm.
13 years ago that she was diagnosed, but that was a lot of stress because we were up every 2 hours around the clock checking her blood
Mm-hmm.
sugar. And so
Yep.
you never really got a full night's sleep. So I was always tired. And I really had to fight through, some of those tough times. And I had a very understanding manager at the time who got it.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't excuse me from doing the job, but there's an understanding, right? If you're a little bit short when you're going
Yeah,
through the tough times, right?
exactly. That's
Right.
right. That's right. And I think that's where I'd again harken back to that earlier question. How's it going? You know, how are you doing? And it's not necessarily that you're asking them to provide a personal response, but it shows that you care, you
Mm-hmm.
know, when you're asking that. And I think in agriculture it's especially important because sometimes you are, you know, managing a territory or you're isolated, you know, remotely but on a remote team. Like these are just simple, you know, elements that can be incorporated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. All right, man. I want to do a little speed round here as we kind of bring this in for a landing here. We've been having a great conversation, and we're pushing up on our time. So, what book do you like in your world right now? What's something you think people ought to be reading?
So one of the books that I've appreciated most through time is Who Moved My Cheese, because I think that no matter who you are, that's going to happen to you. And just understanding how, you know, we as humans react to change and perceive change, and how change can provide growth too, how you can really grow through change. Um, I think that's, you know, incredibly important as far as that is concerned. I'm gonna throw another one out there that's a little bit probably dense, but I have really enjoyed recently reading through Lewis and Clark's journals.
Interesting.
Um, what I have, and we're really going down a path here, but what I have appreciated most about them is that they were journeying through much of what we would now describe as like the Midwest, and then some of the, you know, the West, of course, and how really it hasn't changed all that much. Like they're talking about going up the Missouri River and how it wasn't clear. Like the water wasn't completely clear. And that was because of a lot of decaying prairies and some of the prairie soils and things like that. And I think it's to me, I just think about being on this fifth generation farm and the water quality and the intersection with urban life too. And so to understand where we're headed, I've been trying to understand where we were, you know, and obviously can't talk to Lewis and Clark, but at least reading their journals has been interesting. Rather dense, but interesting.
Yeah, no, that's really wise. I like it. What do you do to keep your energy up?
I would say outside of coffee, I definitely spend time when I'm home. I try to be home. So when having a 3-year old and a 1-year old, I derive energy from them. I'm also an extrovert by nature. So if you put me in a gymnasium with 100 other people, I would derive energy from that. If you put me in a gymnasium on a chair with nobody and lock the door, I would have very low energy. And so for me, I also try to have identified in kind of the next like 60-day intervals, like what's happening from a networking standpoint, or where, where might I be able to meet some new people, or understand the industry at greater length and to more detail. So I would say identifying networking opportunities and sort of getting out of my comfort zone, that's really important to me to do that, to stretch and grow. And then also spending time with our young kids too, is also been helpful for me.
Yeah. It's a really interesting angle that I don't think anybody has taken yet, Andrew, which is identify, like, know your strengths, know what energizes you, know what lights you up, and then be intentional about making sure some of those activities are on your calendar. So even when you're going through
Yeah.
some maybe desert times when you don't have as much of that, there's something coming that's going to kind of reignite that fire.
Absolutely. And I found I can't think of a conference that didn't give me at least, and you have to be intentional, right? I mean, it's got to be aligned with where you're headed, but at least a new relationship or a new idea, something that was going to provide greater impact related to work, or a purpose, that you might really care about.
Love it, man. Dude, this has been a really fun interview. It's been fun to learn from you today, and just kind of go back and forth on intentionality, culture, and retention. How do we engage young people in the workplace? Hurdles, Teddy Roosevelt. I feel like we covered it all in about half an hour. So appreciate you being on here. Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate it. And to all the listeners, hopefully there was at least one element here that will be helpful to you in your daily life.
Heck yeah. Awesome. Thanks.